I do not need your outdated checklists anymore. Pack your things and leave this office immediately." The voice of Bradley Thorne cut through the open floor of Apex Enterprise like a cold blade. It was 4:30 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, and the office was suddenly so quiet that you could hear the copy machine humming in the corner. Bradley was 39 years old, had been hired as the chief financial officer just 2 months ago, and possessed the dangerous combination of a fresh-air business degree and zero operational experience. I stood by the main printer, holding a stack of vendor audit papers, and looked at him. I was 55 years old, had spent 14 years building the compliance framework for this company, and knew exactly what kept the wheels turning. Bradley was staring at me, his chest puffed out, trying to establish authority by making me his first public target. The younger employees stared at their monitors, pretending to be deeply engaged in spreadsheet updates, though none of them were typing. Bradley walked closer, tapping his glossy leather shoes. "Your insistence on compliance reviews has become a bottleneck," he continued, raised loud enough for everyone to hear. "We are streamlining operations now. We need agility, not binders. Your department is a cost center, not a value driver." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue or try to explain the security protocols I had put in place. I simply looked at him, feeling a strange sense of calm. When you spend 14 years watching executives come and go, you learn to spot the ones who will eventually destroy themselves. I gave him a small nod, took my security badge off my lanyard, and placed it on the desk. I walked back to my desk to pack my personal belongings. There was not much to take. 2 framed compliance certificates, a ceramic coffee mug, and a small rubber ball I used to squeeze during stressful audit calls. The transition was silent. No one came over to say goodbye, not because they disliked me, but because Bradley was still standing in the center of the room, watching to see who would show sympathy. I saw Clara Finch, the junior accountant, looking at me with wide eyes, her hands frozen over her keyboard. She knew how much work went into these reports, but she could not risk her job to speak up. I walked out of the building at 4:57 p.m., exactly 3 minutes before the official end of my shift. I had refused to give them even 3 minutes of unpaid overtime. As the elevator doors closed, I looked at the glass logo of Apex Enterprise. It was a logistics and supply chain company that processed over $15,000 in weekly transactions through various vendor networks. And Bradley Thorne had just removed the only person who held the authorization keys. To understand the situation, you have to understand how Apex Enterprise operated. We did not handle our own payment infrastructure. Instead, we relied heavily on Integra Systems. It's a massive financial technology provider that processed 70% of our outgoing vendor payments and payroll distributions. Because of the high volume, our contract with Integra Systems was incredibly strict. It was governed by a document called the Service Authorization Addendum, or SAA. Inside that contract, specifically under Clause 6.1, there was a strict requirement for financial risk mitigation. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, specifically Section 404, the company was required to maintain strict internal controls over financial reporting to protect shareholder value and prevent fraud. To comply with this federal law, Integra Systems required that any transaction override, database change, or protocol bypass must be approved by a designated vendor integrity officer. That officer had to have a specific clearance credential string hard-coded into the gateway. My credential string was WVNC 14 RSR level. It was tied to my name, my personal identification numbers, and my digital signature. Bradley Thorne had never bothered to read the SAA. He saw my daily audits and compliance checklists as unnecessary administrative red tape. He wanted to push payments through faster to show the board that he had reduced processing times. Over my 14 years of service, I had prevented at least 4 major compliance breaches that could have cost the company millions in federal fines, but Bradley did not care about history. He did not realize that the gateway was not just a piece of software you could log into with a shared password. It was a secure legal vault. The moment my employment status was updated to terminated in the Human Resources database, the automatic synchronization script would notify Integra Systems. And the moment that happened, my credential string would become inactive. When I reached my car in the parking lot, I opened my personal laptop and connected to my home network. I did not access the Apex Enterprise servers. I had no desire to violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Instead, I opened a direct email draft to Roger Pratt, the Senior Relationship Manager at Integra Systems. Roger and I had worked together for 9 years to maintain the security of the payment channel, sharing quarterly meetings and compliance workshops. I wrote a short professional message. The subject line was Status Update, Authorization Shift. I attached the official SAA Clause 6, one documentation, and my formal termination notice from HR. I informed him that as of 5 p.m. today, I would no longer be serving as the designated vendor integrity officer for Apex Enterprise. I clicked send, started my car, and drove home. I knew that the corporate machine would continue to run on momentum for a few days. But the gears were already beginning to grind. By Monday morning, Bradley Thorne was ready to collect his victory lap. At the 9 a.m. leadership sync, he strode into the main conference room with his laptop open, wearing a sharp suit and a confident smile. He projected a slide presentation onto the wall screen. The very first slide was titled, in all capital letters, A New ERA of Financial Efficiency. Below the title was a large bar chart comparing the average processing time under my compliance framework to his projected processing time. There were no footnotes, no actual data sources, and no historical figures. It was just a clean graphic with a bright green arrow pointing straight up. He told the department heads that by removing the compliance bottlenecks, the finance team could now process vendor agreements in minutes rather than days. He spoke of agility and digital acceleration as if they were magical spells. Nobody in the room clapped. The older operations managers sat in silence, drinking their coffee, while the HR representative looked nervous. But since Bradley had the CEO's backing for his restructuring plan, nobody wanted to raise their hand and ask about risk compliance. They all nodded politely and agreed to circle back on the details later. On Tuesday, the reality of Bradley's new era began to show its first cracks. He had personally authorized 5 large vendor payments, totaling over $3,500,000, bypassing the compliance queue entirely. He told the accounts payable team that they did not need to wait for validation checks. The newly promoted accounts payable lead, a 28-year-old employee named Clara Finch, noticed that the transactions were flagged with red compliance markers in the system. Clara had only been in her role for 3 weeks after being promoted from a payroll assistant position. She walked into Bradley's office, holding a printout of the queue. Mr. Thorne, these 5 major distributions to our logistics vendors are returning system warnings, she said, pointing to the red text. The system says we need to route them through the standard validation protocol before release. Bradley did not even look up from his screen. He waved his hand dismissively. We do not worship checklists anymore, Clara, he said. Those warnings are just legacy software flags. The system is designed to be overly cautious. Just bypass the queue and force the distributions. We have contract deadlines to meet, and I will not let administrative tape slow us down. Clara hesitated, but she did not have the authority to argue with the CFO. She went back to her desk and clicked the override button. By Wednesday morning, the quiet grumbles in the office had turned into open complaints. The override commands Clara had entered did not resolve the warnings. Instead, the transactions were suspended in a pending status. Furthermore, other departments were beginning to experience secondary failures. The travel reimbursement queue was completely frozen, affecting dozens of sales representatives who had just returned from regional client meetings. Software license renewals were failing, causing the marketing team's primary analytics tools to go dark. A regional director sent 4 urgent emails to the finance team, asking why a $45 Zenver reservation payment for an upcoming client summit had been rejected by the hotel chain's bank. There was no reply from Bradley's office. On the corporate messaging system, the finance operations channel was silent, except for a single animated image of a burning building posted by a frustrated analyst. The vendor reps began to call. Our accounts department receives automatic reminders, but today we started getting direct calls from external managers. One logistics partner who handles our primary freight lanes called Clara twice, stating that their dispatch system would suspend shipments if the outstanding $2,200 Zuzan payment was not settled by the weekend. Clara tried to explain that it was a temporary system lag, but she could hear the skepticism in the partner's voice. The sales department was also in a panic because their corporate cards, which they used for client dinners and travel, were being declined one by one. The system was treating every transaction as a potential security threat because the central compliance gateway was not responding. Meanwhile, across town, I sat at my dining room table, wearing a comfortable hooded sweatshirt and drinking a hot cup of black coffee. In front of me was my personal computer, displaying a secure web browser window. Over my 14 years at the company, I had developed a private dashboard that mirrored the status of our active payment gateways. It did not contain any proprietary customer data, but it tracked the handshake protocols and escalation logs between Apex Enterprise and Integra systems. I watched the system events scroll by in real time. I saw the first warning flags on Tuesday morning. I saw the subsequent override attempts on Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday, the system logs began to fill with failed authorization codes. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck from a safe distance. I pulled out my physical notebook and began writing down the timestamps and error codes. May 4, 10:15 a.m., Gateway ID 408, Transaction Batch 8893, Status, Failed. Reason, Validation String Invalid. Escalation Protocol Triggered. I knew exactly what was happening. Bradley thought he was just bypassing a checklist. He did not realize he was tripping silent security alarms at Integra systems. He thought he was playing a game of speed, but he was actually walking straight into a legal and technical minefield. By Thursday morning, the cracks had turned into a complete system freeze. The accounts payable portal refused to load any new transaction files. Every single batch submission returned a blinking red system error. Gateway authorization failure. Escalation officer signature required. Clara Finch was sitting at her desk, staring at her screen with an expression of pure exhaustion. She had dark circles under her eyes and a small vein was throbbing near her temple. She had spent the last 2 hours trying to submit the weekly operational expense batch, which included utility bills, warehouse rent, and minor vendor invoices. Every single time she pressed the submit button, the screen would freeze for 10 seconds before throwing the error code. She finally picked up her desk phone and called Edward Gibbs, the head of information technology. Edward was 35 years old, had a reputation for solving complex database issues, and was not a man who tolerated executive interference in his systems. Edward walked into the finance bullpen a few minutes later, holding a tablet displaying system logs. "What is going on with the payment gateway, Clara?" he asked, leaning over her monitor. "The gateway is completely locked," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. "I tried to bypass the warnings for the logistics invoices like Bradley instructed, but the system kicked everything back. Now it will not even let me run the regular office utility payments." Edward took the keyboard, typing a series of diagnostic commands into the terminal window. He watched the lines of code scroll by, stopping at a specific entry. "The system is looking for the validation token," Edward said, pointing to the screen. "It is trying to run the security handshake with Integra systems, but the authentication key is missing. The hard-coded security string is WVNC 14 RSR level. That string is tied to Wesley Vance's profile. When Wesley was terminated yesterday, Human Resources marked his account as inactive in the Active Directory. The script synced with Integra's security servers last night. Now the gateway thinks the security officer has vanished, so it has gone into high-security lockdown mode." Edward adjusted his glasses and looked at Clara. "You see, the security token is not just a password. It is a cryptographic key. Last year, Wesley set up a dual-key system as required by SAA Clause 6.1. The private key is stored on a hardware USB security token that Wesley carried with him. The public key is stored on Integra's server. When the system detects an override attempt, it generates a challenge that must be signed using Wesley's private key. Since the system deactivated his profile, the public key has been revoked. We cannot fake this signature. We do not have the hardware token, and even if we did, the account is marked as closed. We are also bound by PCI DSS protocols, which require strict segregation of duties. If I try to manually insert a fake token into the database, it will trigger an automatic security breach report to our compliance auditors, and that could pull our operational license entirely. Bradley Thorne chose that exact moment to walk into the bullpen. He was holding a fresh energy drink and looked annoyed. "Why are the regional sales teams complaining about their expense cards being declined?" he demanded, looking at Clara. "We have a major client event tonight. Get those cards unlocked immediately." "The gateway is frozen, Mr. Thorne," Clara said. "We cannot process any payments." Bradley turned to Edward. "Then fix the system, Edward. You are the head of technology. Remove the security check or change the name on the account. We do not have time for this checklist bureaucracy." Edward let go of the keyboard and looked Bradley straight in the eye. "I cannot do that, Bradley," he said flatly. "The validation protocol is not managed on our side. It is hard-coded into the SAA contract rules at Integra Systems. We do not own the security vault. We only connect to it. To change the authorized credentials or remove the check, Integra Systems requires a formal authentication token signed by the designated officer. That officer is Wesley." Bradley's face flushed with anger. "That is ridiculous," he snapped. "Wesley does not work here anymore. We fired him. Surely there is an administrator bypass code." "We are the client. We pay them millions." "There is no bypass," Edward replied. "The gateway is built to comply with federal financial reporting rules. If they allowed a simple admin override, the entire system would fail audit compliance under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You cannot just write a patch to bypass federal banking protocols without committing a compliance violation." Bradley paced back and forth, his chest heaving. "This is just a database issue," he muttered, trying to convince himself. "I want you to call Integra System Support right now, Clara. Tell them the CFO of Apex Enterprise demands an immediate credential transfer. Tell them we are changing the designated officer to myself." Clara looked at Edward, then back at Bradley. She slowly picked up the receiver and dialed the primary client support line for Integra Systems. Bradley stood right next to her, tapping his knuckles on the partition wall, his impatience filling the space. The support line rang 4 times before routing them through an automated directory. It took 3 minutes of listening to elevator music and pressing buttons to navigate the security verification prompt, her hands trembling, until she finally reached a live representative in vendor operations. She put the call on speakerphone so Bradley could hear. "Thank you for calling Integra Systems Support. This is Devin in vendor operations. How can I help you today?" The voice from the speakerphone was calm and professional. Clara cleared her throat, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, this is Clara Finch from Apex Enterprise. We are experiencing a major gateway freeze on our payment pipeline. Every transaction we submit returns an authorization error." Devin paused for a moment. "Let me pull up your account profile," he said. "I see the logs here." "Yes, your system has been hard frozen under Clause 6.1 of the Service Authorization Addendum." "How do we resolve this?" Clara asked. "We need to release these payments today." Devin explained the protocol. Under the terms of the SAA, any gateway override or change in access credentials must be formally authorized by the designated vendor integrity officer. On your profile, that is Wesley Vance. The system is waiting for his digital signature and hardware key validation to clear the queue. Clara bit her lip. "Well, Mr. Vance is no longer with the company." There was a brief silence on the line. "That is unfortunate," Devin said. "In that case, Mr. Vance must log into the vendor portal and formally transfer his credentials to a new officer. If he cannot do that, you will have to undergo a complete contract re-execution cycle." Bradley Thorne could not contain his frustration any longer. He leaned over Clara's desk and snatched the receiver from her hand. "Listen to me, Devin," he barked. "This is Bradley Thorne, Chief Financial Officer of Apex Enterprise. I do not care about your contract cycles or your checklists. We process over 15 million in transactions through your system every week. You will bypass this credential block and restore our gateway access immediately. I have millions in vendor payments that must clear by 5 p.m. Devin's tone remained perfectly flat, unaffected by Bradley's shouting. "Sir, we do not bypass security protocols," he said. "The SAA is a legally binding contract that complies with Sarbanes-Oxley internal control requirements. If we were to bypass the validation gate without the authorized officer's signature, it would represent a severe compliance breach for both our companies. We cannot and will not override the system." Bradley's ears turned deep red. "I am the CFO," he shouted. "I have the authority to sign for this company, sir. Devin replied. You are the CFO of Apex Enterprise, but you are not the registered integrity officer on this gateway. Unless Wesley Vance authorizes the transfer, the system remains locked. Have a good day. The call disconnected with a click. Within 10 minutes, a formal email arrived in the inbox of Lawrence Miller, the CEO of Apex Enterprise, with the General Counsel CC'd. It contained a certified PDF document from Integra Systems' legal department. The notice was blunt: immediate gateway suspension. The document stated that due to repeated attempts to bypass security controls and submit unauthorized overrides without the designated officer's credentials, Apex Enterprise was in active violation of SAA Clause 6.1. Under the terms of the contract, all API access and payment processing pipelines were suspended indefinitely. To reinstate service, Apex Enterprise was required to submit a verified escalation reauthorization form signed by Wesley Vance. By 2 p.m. on Friday, Lawrence Miller had called an emergency board meeting. Lawrence was 62 years old, had run the company for 8 years, and preferred quiet, predictable operations. He sat at the head of the conference table, his head in his hands. Bradley Thorne sat to his right, looking pale and sweating through his shirt. Across from them was Melissa Raymond, the company's external legal counsel. Melissa was 48 years old, extremely sharp, and did not waste time protecting executive egos. Let me make this simple, Melissa said, tossing her pen onto the table. Bradley has created a massive legal liability. By terminating Wesley Vance without reviewing the SAA, you have deactivated the only credential string that can access the payment gateway. Furthermore, the system logs show that Bradley ordered Clara to enter manual override codes after Wesley was fired. In the eyes of the law, attempting to access a secured financial database using a deactivated employee's credentials can be viewed as unauthorized access under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery applies not just to paper checks, but also to digital signing processes. Attempting to simulate Wesley's digital credentials to force payments through is a felony offense. If you had succeeded in forging his signature or bypassing the protocol, the bank would have flagged the transactions as fraudulent, and you would be facing criminal charges. Bradley tried to defend himself. It was a routing error. I did not attempt fraud. It does not matter what you call it, Bradley. Melissa snapped. The fact is, our payment infrastructure is dead. We cannot pay our logistics providers, which means our shipping lanes will freeze by Monday. We cannot process payroll for 450 employees. And the only person who can fix this is Wesley Vance. The CEO looked at Bradley, his expression cold. Bradley, did you know about this clause? Bradley swallowed hard. I thought it was just a default name in a template. It was not a real operational barrier. Melissa laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. It is very real when it shuts down a 15,000 weekly business, she said. The final meeting was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 a.m. sharp. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with tension. The CEO of Apex Enterprise, Lawrence Miller, sat at the head of the table, flanked by Melissa Raymond and several senior board members. Bradley Thorne was permitted to attend, but he was seated at the far end of the room, looking empty and defeated. On the large display screen on the wall, the video connection to Integra Systems was established. Dennis Albright, the CEO of Integra Systems, appeared on the screen. Dennis was 58 years old, had a calm but absolute authority, and did not waste time with small talk. Behind him on his office shelf was a single leather binder labeled Integra Security Protocols. Lawrence, Dennis began. Let us get straight to the point. Your company has attempted multiple unauthorized overrides on our gateway, which triggered our security filters. As it stands, your payment pipelines are frozen. We cannot reactivate them under our current security compliance standards without the signature of a verified escalation officer. Lawrence Miller leaned forward. Dennis, we understand the situation now. We are prepared to update our authorized signatories and submit the paperwork immediately. Dennis shook his head slowly. I do not think you understand the timeline. Lawrence, a standard re-onboarding process for a new integrity officer takes 90 days. It requires cross-departmental technical audits, security key generation, and compliance validation. During those 90 days, your system will remain completely offline. We estimate the technical restructuring costs alone will run close to $1,200,000, not to mention the operational damage to your business from frozen payments. Lawrence's face went pale. 90 days is impossible, he said. Our operations will collapse. Is there no other way? Dennis adjusted his glasses. There is one way. We have recently engaged an external consultant to oversee our gateway compliance. That consultant is Wesley Vance. Wesley has agreed to act as our independent vendor liaison for your account. Since Wesley already holds the active cryptographic credentials and knows your system architecture, he has the authority to sign the continuity waiver. If Wesley signs the waiver, we can restore your gateway access within 2 hours. However, Wesley will only work under his own terms. Lawrence looked at Melissa, who simply gave him a slight nod. It was the only choices they had. What are his terms? Lawrence asked. Dennis pulled up a document. Wesley has drafted a consulting agreement. He will serve as the independent compliance monitor for Apex Enterprise. His annual retainer is $240,000, which is exactly triple the salary you were paying him as an employee. The contract must be signed by your board today, and he will have sole authority over your risk compliance protocols. Bradley Thorne will have no access or input into the finance systems whatsoever. The boardroom was completely silent. Everyone looked at Bradley, who was staring down at his hands, his face completely white. Lawrence did not hesitate. He looked at the board members, who all gave a quiet nod of approval. We accept the terms, Lawrence said. Send the agreement. Dennis nodded once. Very well. I will have Wesley sign the waiver as soon as your board signs the contract. And Lawrence, next time you decide to streamline your operations, I suggest you look at the foundation before you pull out the bricks. The screen went black. Within 30 minutes, the board had signed the contract. Lawrence Miller slowly slid a white envelope across the table to Bradley. It contained his formal notice of termination for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Bradley left the building without a box, carrying his briefcase in silence. His short and disastrous career at Apex Enterprise officially over. 2 hours later, the green lights on Clara's monitor began to blink, the transaction queue began to clear, and the pending payments rolled out to the vendors. Meanwhile, at his kitchen table, I looked at the electronic signature page on my screen. I clicked my mouse, applying my digital signature to the waiver form. I closed my laptop and took a sip of my coffee, which was still hot. For the first time in 14 years, I did not have to rush to an office. I did not have to listen to an executive explain how my checklists were slowing down their progress. I was now an independent consultant, earning $240,000 a year to do the exact same compliance reviews I had always done, but this time under my own rules. The retainer agreement also specified that I would work no more than 15 hours a week, giving me plenty of time to enjoy my life. Bradley Thorne thought he was removing a simple bottleneck. He did not realize that some bottlenecks are actually the support pillars holding up the entire roof. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the rain fall on the street. I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was a good day to watch the system work, knowing that sometimes compliance is the ultimate victory.